The sun was setting, casting an eerie glow over the quiet street. Alone Hell's angel biker, towering in his black leather and tattoos, revved the engine of his motorcycle. He was no stranger to chaos, but today was different. A little girl, no older than 7, stood across the road, her wide eyes locked onto his. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Without a word, she gave him a silent signal, something so subtle yet powerful, it sent a chill down his spine. What could a little girl possibly want from someone like him? Was it a plea for help? Or something darker? The biker's instinct screamed to turn away, but something about her presence held him in place. He couldn't shake the feeling that this brief encounter would change everything. What happened next will leave you in shock. Stay tuned. The streets were buzzing with the usual late afternoon energy, cars honking, people rushing home after long days. But amidst all the noise, there was an unsettling calm in the air. A lone figure stood out, a Hell's Angel biker. His black leather jacket gleamed under the fading sun, his tattooed arms exuding a sense of menace. He wasn't the type to blend in. His reputation preceded him, tough, fearless, and dangerous. The kind of guy you cross the street to avoid. But today, there was something different. His usual swagger was replaced by an unusual stillness. He had stopped his bike at the corner, eyeing the busy street, lost in thought. And then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, standing alone on the sidewalk. She looked out of place, dressed in a faded pink dress, her hair tangled in the wind. She was looking right at him. At first, he brushed it off as a random glance. But then, she did something that would change everything. Without a word, without a single movement, she gave him a silent signal, a small but deliberate gesture. A signal only someone paying close attention would notice. The biker's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like anything he'd experienced before. He had been in countless dangerous situations, but this felt different. Something about this little girl made his instincts flare up. Who was she? Why was she looking at him like that? What did that signal mean? His mind raced, but there was no time to figure it out. The moment had passed, but the questions lingered, and with them a sense of unease. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives forever. The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. The once bustling neighborhood was now quieter, the streets slowly emptying as people headed home after another long day. It was the kind of scene that could lull anyone into a sense of security, but for him, it felt wrong. The biker's motorcycle growled softly as it idled at the street corner, its powerful engine purring beneath his hands. He didn't like stopping, didn't like the stillness, but something about today felt off. As he sat there, alone with the hum of the engine and the distant sounds of the city winding down, his eyes scanned the street. He was a big guy, well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and imposing. His long beard, streaked with gray, and the tattoos that covered his arms and neck gave him a rugged, intimidating look. One that made most people avert their gaze the moment they saw him. But not her. Across the street, there she was, a little girl, standing all alone. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, her dress faded and worn, her hair tangled by the breeze. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk, her small hands clasped together as she stared at him, her big brown eyes never leaving his. At first, he didn't think much of it. Kids were curious, and he was used to being the subject of stares. But this wasn't just curiosity. No, this was something else. There was a depth in her gaze that he couldn't quite place. It was as if she was studying him, sizing him up, and not in the way kids usually do. No, this was different. The moment stretched on, and the biker's unease grew. He shifted on his bike, his hands gripping the handlebars tighter as his gaze flickered back to the girl. She hadn't moved an inch, still standing in the same spot, her eyes locked onto his. Then it happened. A slight shift of her head, a flick of her eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But in that brief moment, the biker felt it, a silent signal, a quiet plea for something. His heart skipped a beat, a feeling of sudden awareness washing over him. He wasn't sure what it was, but he felt the weight of that simple gesture. The girl's eyes didn't blink. She didn't speak. But the message was clear. It was as if she was silently asking for help, or maybe even warning him. He didn't know why, but the biker couldn't tear his gaze away from her. Something about the girl felt important. She wasn't just another kid wandering the streets. She wasn't just another passerby. There was a quiet urgency in her that he couldn't ignore. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The world around him faded into the background, leaving only the girl and him. He could feel the pulse of the city, the hum of distant conversations and car engines, but it all seemed muted compared to the intensity of that moment. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the handlebars, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. Was she in trouble? The biker's mind raced with questions. Why had she singled him out? Why had she chosen him? Of all the people walking by, of all the cars driving past, it was him she had focused on. Was she trying to ask for help? Or was there something more sinister at play? He glanced around, instinctively searching the street for anything unusual. But everything appeared normal. The neighborhood was quiet. No one was looking at her. No one seemed to notice. But the biker knew better. He had been around long enough to understand that the silence of a moment often spoke louder than anything. And in this case, it spoke volumes. He shifted on his bike again, debating whether to go over to her. But something held him back. His instincts told him to be cautious, to turn away, to ignore it, and just ride off like he usually did. That's what he would have done in any other situation. But for some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that walking away was the wrong choice. The girl wasn't just standing there. She was waiting for something. But what? A sudden gust of wind whipped through the street, causing the girl's dress to flutter around her legs. Her hair blew across her face, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were fixed on him, unwavering, as if she knew something he didn't. The biker's mind snapped back to the present. His hand instinctively moved to the throttle, but he didn't start the engine. Instead, he sat there, watching, waiting for the next move. His heart beat in his chest, a drum of anticipation. Was this a sign? A warning? Or maybe just an odd coincidence? He knew he couldn't sit there forever, lost in his thoughts. The world around him was continuing, life moving on as usual, but for him, it felt like everything had slowed to a crawl. He was caught between the unknown and the familiar, caught between what was safe and what was risky. The little girl didn't move, but her stare never wavered. There was something in her eyes, something that sent a chill down his spine. And despite every instinct telling him to drive off and forget about her, he felt himself drawn to her. He didn't know why, but he had to find out what she wanted. With a deep breath, the biker pulled in the clutch and eased the bike forward, slowly making his way across the street. His mind raced, but his body was calm, operating on some primal instinct he couldn't explain. The girl didn't flinch, didn't move. She was waiting for him. He stopped a few feet away, the roar of his engine now replaced by the silence of the moment. "Hey, there," he said, his voice gruff, more out of habit than anything else. The girl didn't respond. Instead, she simply nodded, her expression still unreadable. And then, without a word, she turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the street. The biker stood there, frozen, a cold feeling creeping over him. His heart pounded in his chest. What had just happened? He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't over. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. The sound of his motorcycle's engine faded into the background as the biker sat there, alone on the street corner, staring after the little girl. He had no idea what had just happened, but the image of her small, haunting eyes lingered in his mind. Something about her, the way she had looked at him, the way she had silently communicated that message, was unsettling. He had encountered countless people in his life, but none had ever made him feel the way she had. He revved the engine again, the noise vibrating through his body, and let out a long breath. He didn't want to be stuck in the past, but that girl had pulled him into a place he hadn't thought about in years. A place he didn't want to revisit. He shook his head, trying to push away the thoughts. He had always been a man of action, a man who lived for the now. He wasn't the kind to sit around dwelling on the past. But the truth was his past had shaped him, and it had shaped him into the man he was today. His life hadn't been an easy one. Born into a broken home, he had learned from a young age that the world wasn't a friendly place. His father had been a drunk, abusive, and indifferent, and his mother had never been able to protect him from it. The scars, both physical and emotional, were something he carried with him every day. By the time he was a teenager, he had stopped pretending that he could ever escape the chaos. He had made his choice early. He would survive no matter what it took. At 15, he had dropped out of school and found himself in a world of trouble. Gangs, drugs, and street violence were a part of the scenery, and he quickly became accustomed to it. He wasn't afraid of the violence, the danger, or the fear that seemed to run through his veins. In fact, he had embraced it. In the world he grew up in, there's no room for weakness. The weak got crushed under the weight of the strong, and he wasn't about to let that happen. It was during these years that he found the Hell's Angels. It was like finding a family, a place where the rules were different, where strength was the currency that bought respect. The Brotherhood was everything. They took him in, taught him the ways of the road, and gave him a sense of purpose he had never known before. The biker had worked his way up the ranks quickly. He had always been good at fighting, at doing whatever it took to survive. But what really set him apart was his ability to make tough decisions. The kind of decisions that left you wondering if you had crossed a line. But he had never cared. The rules of society didn't apply to him. The only rule he followed was survival, and he was damn good at it. But the deeper he got into the world of the Hell's Angels, the more isolated he became. He began to see the darkness in the Brotherhood, the crime, the drugs, the violence that defined their existence. He had always been a part of that world, but as the years went on, he started to see the cracks in the foundation. He began to question whether he wanted to keep living this life, or if he wanted something more. But the more he thought about it, the more complicated it became. And that's when the girl's signal hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, the world seemed to blur, and his mind flashed back to his past, to the decisions he had made, the people he had hurt, and the things he had seen. His hands tightened on the handlebars of his bike, and a wave of guilt washed over him. He remembered a night many years ago, a night he had never been able to forget. It was the night he had made a choice that would forever alter his path. He had been sent on a job by the Brotherhood, a simple task, they said, one that didn't require much thought. But that night, everything had gone wrong. A routine robbery had turned into a violent confrontation, and in the chaos, an innocent man had been killed. The biker had been the one to pull the trigger. The guilt had gnawed at him ever since. He hadn't planned on killing anyone that night. It had been an accident, an unfortunate consequence of a dangerous life. But the truth was he had pulled the trigger, and that had been a turning point for him. From that day on, he had tried to bury the guilt. He had buried it in more violence, more crimes, and more years of living on the edge. But no matter how hard he tried, the memory of that night never fully left him. It lingered in the back of his mind like a dark cloud hanging over him, reminding him of what he had become. And now, with the little girl's signal, it was all coming back. Her silent plea had cracked open something inside him, something he had kept buried for so long. He had lived a life of violence and revenge, but now he was wondering, had it all been worth it? He shook his head again, trying to focus. The last thing he wanted was to get lost in a sea of regret. The past was the past, and there was nothing he could do to change it. But that girl, there was something about her that made him question everything. What did she want from him? Why had she singled him out? It wasn't like he had ever been the kind of person people looked to for help. Hell, people were usually afraid of him. He was a Hell's Angel, a man who lived outside the law, a man who had hurt others and had been hurt in return. But that little girl had seen something in him, something no one else had. And now, he couldn't shake the feeling that her signal wasn't just a call for help. It was something more, a warning maybe, or a message. But what was it? The biker knew he couldn't let it go. Something inside him stirred, a sense of responsibility he hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was the same feeling that had kept him alive all these years, the sense that even in the darkest of times, he still had the power to change. He started his bike and revved the engine, his thoughts racing. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing for sure. That little girl had just put him on a path he couldn't ignore. And wherever it led, he was going to have to face whatever he had been running from all these years. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might be ready for it. The engine of the bike hummed as the biker revved it again, its sound slicing through the otherwise quiet evening air. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all swirling around that small, haunting signal the girl had given him. The image of her still lingered in his mind like a ghost, her eyes, those dark, wide eyes locked onto his as if she knew something he didn't. She had seen something in him, something that made her signal him out of the crowd. As he rode through the street, he tried to push away the gnawing sensation that something was pulling him toward her. He was used to following his instincts, but this time, those instincts weren't just about survival. They were about something else. Something deeper. Something personal. The familiar street signs blurred past him as he followed the path she had taken, his mind refusing to settle. He couldn't help but feel as though his entire life had been building to this moment. He wasn't sure if it was fate or some kind of cosmic joke, but something in him told him he needed to act. This wasn't a random encounter. He reached the corner where he had last seen her. The street was quiet, almost eerily so. The only sound was the idle growl of his bike's engine and the distant hum of the city. The little girl was nowhere to be seen. He hesitated, unsure whether he had missed her or if she had already disappeared into the shadows. He pulled over to the side of the road, his boots hitting the pavement with a soft thud. He glanced around, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but the street was still empty except for a few parked cars and the faint rustle of trees in the breeze. Something didn't sit right with him. The feeling in his gut told him she was close. He couldn't shake the sense that she was out there somewhere, just beyond his reach, watching him. "Where are you?" he muttered under his breath, glancing up and down the street. His eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding spot. He wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. As if on cue, a soft sound reached his ears, the sound of footsteps. He turned sharply, eyes darting across the street, but saw nothing. His hand instinctively went to the knife sheathed at his side, his senses on high alert. Then he heard it again, closer this time. There, at the end of the alleyway, a figure emerged from the shadows. The little girl. She stood there, framed by the dim light from a nearby street lamp, her small form almost ethereal against the backdrop of the darkened street. Her eyes locked onto his again, and for a moment neither of them moved. She looked calm, composed, but there was something unsettling in the stillness, a sense of purpose in the way she stood there, as if she were waiting for something or someone. The biker swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what he was doing or what he hoped to find, but all of a sudden, the adrenaline coursing through his veins told him he had to approach her. Stepping off the bike, he moved toward her, each footfall heavy against the concrete. The night air was cool, but a bead of sweat traced down his neck as he closed the distance between them. His eyes never left hers, and the weight of her gaze made it feel like the world was closing in around him. When he was only a few feet away, the little girl tilted her head slightly, just as she had earlier, and then took a slow step forward. The biker paused, his hand instinctively resting on the hilt of his knife, but he didn't draw it. Something inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him he didn't need it. You wanted something from me," he said, his voice rough. It wasn't a question, more like a statement, like he already knew the answer. The girl didn't speak. She just stood there, her eyes steady on him. The biker felt an unusual sense of tension building in his chest. She wasn't scared of him. In fact, she seemed completely at ease. It was unsettling. Most people were afraid of him. He was a Hell's Angel, after all. But this girl? She wasn't afraid. She didn't flinch, didn't back away. She just looked at him as if she were waiting for him to figure something out. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy. The biker's mind raced, but he found no answers. He had spent his whole life fighting, running, and surviving. But none of those skills prepared him for whatever this was. The little girl finally took another step toward him, breaking the silence. She didn't speak a word. Instead, she extended her small hand toward him. The biker stared at her outstretched palm, unsure of what to do. His first instinct was to reject it, to keep his distance. He had learned a long time ago to never trust anyone, especially not someone as mysterious as this girl. But something in her eyes, something in the way she stood there, waiting for him, made him hesitate. His hand twitched at his side, and before he could think better of it, he reached out. The moment his hand touched hers, a strange jolt of energy ran through him, like a surge of electricity. His heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something stir deep inside him. It was as if the past, the weight of everything he had done, the mistakes, the violence, was rushing to the surface. And for that fleeting moment, it felt like it could all be undone. But before he could process what was happening, she quickly pulled her hand back, and the connection was broken. Her eyes never left his, but the brief touch had left him shaken. "What do you want from me?" he asked again, his voice trembling slightly. It wasn't fear, but something close to it. Something unfamiliar. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she turned and started walking away, slowly, her small figure retreating back into the shadows from where she'd come. He took a step forward, instinctively wanting to follow her, but something stopped him. He wasn't sure what, but he didn't chase her. She had come to him, and now she was leaving. But he knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Something bigger was at play, and whatever that little girl had just shown him, whatever silent message she had given him, he had to understand it. He couldn't turn away. He couldn't ignore it. As the girl disappeared into the darkness, the biker stood there for a long moment, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. He didn't know what was coming, but he could feel it. And whatever it was far from over. The silence of the night hung heavily around him, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. The biker stood frozen in place, staring into the darkness where the girl had vanished. His hand still tingled from the brief touch of hers, a sensation he couldn't explain. It was as though her touch had left an invisible mark on him, something he couldn't wash away, no matter how hard he tried. He shook his head, trying to push the confusion away. This wasn't like him. He was a Hell's Angel, a man of action, a man who made decisions based on instinct, not emotion. He had always kept his distance from the world, from feelings, from attachments. He trusted no one, and no one trusted him. That's how it worked. But the girl's signal, her touch, it had shaken him. Why had she singled him out? What did she want from him? Was this some kind of trap? A test? He didn't know, but it gnawed at him, eating away at his mind as he slowly turned back to his bike. His hand rested on the handlebars, his mind racing with possibilities. But then something shifted. The air around him seemed to thrum with an unspoken tension, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He glanced back down the alleyway, almost expecting to see her standing there again, watching him. But the street was empty, the shadows still and silent. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that had set his chest tight. There was no point in standing around in the dark. He needed to move. He needed to figure out what was going on. As he turned back to the bike, ready to leave, a sudden noise broke the quiet. A soft whisper, barely audible, reached his ears. His head snapped up, his senses immediately on alert. The whisper came again, louder this time. It was the sound of someone calling out his name. "Hey, you there?" He spun around, his heart pounding. This time, he wasn't imagining it. The voice was real, and it was coming from behind him. The alleyway. The biker's instincts kicked in. He wasn't alone. He stepped away from the bike, slowly, cautiously, keeping his eyes fixed on the shadows. The voice had sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. His fingers grazed the handle of a knife, sheathed at his waist, a comforting weight that gave him some sense of control. He didn't move, just waited, his gaze darting from corner to corner, trying to make out any shape or figure in the darkness. And then from the shadows stepped a man. The biker's eyes narrowed immediately, his posture defensive. The man was tall, wearing a leather jacket, a familiar cut. A Hell's Angel. But there was something wrong. The man's face was pale, his eyes hollow, almost as if he had seen something he couldn't forget. He looked broken. "Who the hell are you?" the biker growled, his voice sharp. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a hesitant step forward, his eyes flickering nervously as though he was unsure whether to approach or retreat. There was something desperate about his presence, something urgent that made the biker's gut tighten. I'm not supposed to be here," the man muttered, almost to himself, his voice trembling, "but I need to talk to you." The biker's heart skipped a beat. Something about this situation felt off, like they were standing on the edge of a cliff, and one wrong move would send them tumbling into the unknown. "You've got 5 seconds to explain why you're standing in front of me," the biker snapped, his patience thinning. The man's eyes widened, and he seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if weighing the danger of his words. Finally, he spoke. "It's about the girl," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The biker's blood ran cold. The girl. How did this man know about her? He hadn't told anyone. He hadn't said a word to anyone about the silent signal or the strange encounter. "What about her?" the biker demanded, his voice tight with tension. The man took another step closer, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He looked over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to be watching. "You need to listen to me. She's not just some kid. She's a messenger, and she's been sent to find you." The biker's confusion deepened, and a flash of annoyance flickered in his eyes. He was no fool. He had lived too long in this world to fall for some wild tale. But something in the man's eyes, the fear, the urgency, made him hesitate. "I don't have time for this." "Who the hell are you?" the biker asked again, his patience wearing thin. The man swallowed hard, looking around nervously. I'm one of them. I used to be. I was in the Brotherhood. But I'm not anymore." His words trailed off, as if the weight of his past was too much for him to carry. The biker's eyes narrowed. There were many who had come and gone in the Hell's Angels, people who either couldn't hack it or decided to leave. Some of them vanished without a trace, others were discarded like broken tools. "What do you want with me?" the biker demanded. The man's voice shook. "The girl, she's more important than you think. She's not just a messenger. She's connected to something bigger, something dangerous, something that the Brotherhood doesn't want you to know about. You're being watched? She's the key." The biker felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure if the man was crazy or if he was telling the truth. But the intensity of his words, the fear in his eyes, made the biker pause. "Why me?" the biker asked, his voice low. "Because of what you've done," the man said, his words heavy with meaning. "Because of the choices you've made. You can't run from your past forever. The girl, she's been sent to you because you have a chance to change things. But you need to listen to her before it's too late." The biker's pulse quickened. His past had always been something he tried to outrun, something he buried deep inside. He had made his peace with the choices he'd made. Or so he thought. But now, standing here with this man, this broken figure from his past, and hearing about the girl's connection to something bigger, something dangerous, the biker realized that maybe he had been running for too long. And now, it seemed, there was no turning back. The wind carried the scent of gasoline and dirt as the biker stood, the weight of the man's words hanging heavily in the air. "She's the key." Those words echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. The girl, the silent signal, the touch, everything had led him to this moment, but what did it mean? What could she possibly be a key to? And why him? He wasn't the kind of man who believed in fate or destiny. But this felt different. The man in front of him, a former Hell's Angel like him, looked terrified. His face was pale, his hands shaking as if he was afraid to be here. Every instinct the biker had told him to walk away, to leave this behind, to forget the girl and the strange warning. But his gut told him there was no escaping this. He couldn't just ride off into the night, leaving everything behind. His past was catching up with him, faster than he could ever have anticipated. The wind shifted again, and the man's voice cut through the stillness. "You don't understand. It's not just about the brotherhood. It's bigger than that. She's not a kid anymore. The girl, she's part of something you can't outrun. It's been watching you, waiting for the right moment to find you, to make you choose. The biker felt his pulse quicken. Choose. The word lingered in his mind like a bitter taste. What choice? What could he possibly choose now? His whole life had been one long series of choices made in the heat of the moment, decisions driven by survival, instinct, or sheer force of will. But this was different. This was something bigger than the rough streets he'd once known. Who are they? He asked, his voice low, the question hanging in the night air. The former Hell's Angel flinched, his gaze darting around as if afraid someone might be listening. I don't know. I only know they're everywhere. They've been watching you for years, ever since that night. The night the man trailed off, the guilt in his eyes clear. The night you crossed the line. The biker didn't need him to finish the sentence. He knew exactly what he was talking about. The man was referring to the night he had killed the innocent bystander. The night he had pulled the trigger without thinking, without hesitation. The moment that had solidified his place in the underworld. The moment that in a twisted way had made him who he was today. I've made my peace with that, the biker said, his voice gruff. There's no going back. But the man shook his head, his eyes desperate. You think that's it? You think that's what's going to define you forever? You're wrong. What you did, what we did, doesn't just stay in the past. The things we've done have consequences. You don't get to just walk away from that. You can't outrun it. The door creaked open as they stepped inside, the dim light flickering overhead. The space was cold, empty, save for a few scattered crates and shadows in the corners. But there, standing in the center of the room, was another figure. A man. The biker's stomach churned. This man was no stranger. The face was familiar, a man from his past, a former ally from the Brotherhood. The one who had been responsible for sending him on the mission that had gone wrong all those years ago. The one whose decision had cost an innocent life. You. The biker growled, stepping forward. His fists clenched, and the air seemed to thrum with the tension between them. The man's eyes flickered with something resembling guilt, but it quickly faded into something darker. You're here, he said flatly, as though the biker's arrival was inevitable. Why did you send me here? The biker demanded. Why did you bring me back into this? The man smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. You're here because you made the choice, he said, and now you have to face the consequences. The girl stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. Her eyes were calm, unshaken. He's right. You've always been part of this, even if you didn't realize it. But now the world is watching. You can't run anymore. The biker's heart raced as he stood there, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. But one thing was clear now. This wasn't just about his past. It was about something much larger, something far more dangerous. You're part of something bigger, the man said again. And now you have to make the hardest choice of all. Will you fight for what's left, or will you walk away and let it all burn? The biker stood frozen, his gaze shifting between the girl and the man. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, suffocating him. There was no going back. Whatever came next, he would have to face it. And it would be the fight of his life. The reckoning had begun. You've just witnessed the beginning of a battle that will change everything. The biker made his choice, and now his fate is sealed. But what about you? What would you have done? Would you fight, or would you run? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if you're not already part of our family, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss the next twist in this insane journey. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. This story's far from over.